Okay, I think we're live. Dmitry, pretty sure. So, hello everyone. We have Dmitry here. He's a dear friend of mine. I know him for a while. He's also a colleague, a fellow therapist, and he's a director of Process Therapy Institute. Very cool. So today we're going to be talking about this concept, and Dmitry is going to tell us all about it because I'm exploring it with him and with you, all of you. And it's a concept, it's self-belonging in relationships. And Dmitry, please tell us what it is and how do you understand it, and how can it be helpful to us when we are relating to others?
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to do this with you. So yeah, let me just start by kind of paying, I guess, due respect to where I got this concept. So self-belonging, I originally heard it from John O'Donohue. He's like a Celtic mystic, and he's a poet, and he talks about, he says that being and longing is belonging. And so that when you combine being and longing, it's belonging. And he says that the kind of deepest and most truest way to belong is to belong to yourself, not to belong to like a group of people or organization or even a family or even a marriage. Those are not that those are types of belonging they're not bad, but they are not the most essential and the deepest, and the deepest one is the self.
And how do you look? So it resonates like being most loyal to yourself, right? Or like, is that like, how do you know when you self belong, or how does it feel like or look like?
Yeah. I think it's definitely hard to explain with words because it's an experience, but of course we could try to tackle it the best way we can. It's, you know, when I use words, it's kind of like I wrestle with them because one word is always kind of insufficient. But you could start with thinking about like kind of reliance, but even that seems like a bit like protectionist or isolationist, like, oh, I'm going to rely on myself and nobody else. So that's kind of insufficient. So I don't like to approach it from that end. But for me, it's more like being emotionally available and having the capacity to be available to yourself enough so that you can kind of develop those dimensions within yourself and see all the different rooms and corridors in your inner home, so that you can be more at home. And so reliance, sorry, not reliance, belonging is more like being at home, being at home in your own heart. And and I think that, see, when I think about being at home, I always think about the inverse of that, which is homelessness. And I think that most of us, I mean, I don't know anybody that doesn't have some sense of inner homelessness within them, like this sort of, like this kind of disgust or loneliness, or this place where they don't really like to touch because it's like, And so most people kind of avoid their own inner homelessness by going externally, like, okay, this, like attaching to a partner or some social thing, or maybe even like reading, or but there's a certain kind of squeamishness about being like in touch with that deeper home. So that's the best way that I can describe it.
So it's an ability to contact those places in us that are like constricted and painful, right? And like staying with yourself, right?
Right.
And it seems like for some of us, like say if you had trauma or difficult experience, you might like, do you believe that some need to learn that, like say in therapy, how to do that? Or do you think we'll have like an inherent ability to go there, to do this process, to self-belong?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely helpful to be guided by somebody like me or you, to inquire with sort of help and support, like a spaciousness. But when I guide people through it, it's like I'm there, but I'm not the one doing it. I'm supportive, like holding space for that exploration so that it's maybe a little bit more bearable. But yeah, I mean, I think we're all capable of it, but I think that sometimes without some support, I think it can be an extremely scary and uncomfortable place. And but I think that's it. But it is essential, because I think that what to the untrained mind or the untrained eye, like when a person feels this sort of like feeling like constricted or kind of uncomfortable, they may kind of displace that as a certain sense of like indignation, like, oh, you're not there for me. So you might find yourself being kind of blaming your partner, or kind of setting expectations like, oh, you should have been there for me, and you or kind of you abandoned me and things like that. So but when guided into that experience, or when you're able to love your way through those uncomfortable feelings, and sort of settle down and put your metaphorical bags down, and just like, okay, I'm just going to be in this place, and it sort of alchemically changes it. It changes your relationship from an aversion, like, oh, I don't like this, to like, okay, let me just like attend here. Let me be intimate with myself here. That changes it, and you start to be comfortable, and you find like a sense of comfort there, and you can start to like, wow, you can start to like it there. And when you can start to be resting in that place, then all of a sudden you coming from not from a place of need and desperation towards your partner, but from a place of understanding and love, and even understanding their own homelessness, and being able to be supportive towards them instead of blaming that they're not there for you. And so there could be an outpour of love towards your partner.
Sounds like a good like recipe against well, not against, but more like a treatment for codependency, right? Like, as codependency, that's exactly what it is. It's like not being able to tolerate your own state so much that you like need others. You just cannot withstand it, right? And so if you learn to do it, then you start to separate a little, because a lot of couples, when they come in to therapy and they ask help, they're like this. They're like this, right? They're not even able to identify, this is mine, this is yours. They're just like enmeshed, right? Well, enmeshed is like the term we use, but they're just so like, even energetically, they're so intertwined.
Right.
To the point where, like, when one partner feels down, the other one is like also down.
Yeah, or takes responsibility,
or takes responsibility, or feels guilty that, say, they're not down, so they feel guilty, and they feel like, and the other partner is like, well, you don't love me, and that's why I'm down, right? You're not giving me enough attention, right? That's how it plays out a lot of times.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, so with a couple like that, say, how would you work with them to help them with the issue using this self-belonging process?
Yeah, I mean, and before I answer that question, I just want to say that to some degree we are all codependent, and I think we have a cultural codependent. Like, we're all taught to be codependent, because it's just in the language that we use. We're not really brought up to have a sense of ownership. There's a certain kind of we, or we're fine. Like, we kind of talk over our partner and say, we're doing okay, we're this, we're that. So there's a certain kind of
well, it starts with the mother too, with the mother and the child, right? And the mother and child, I sometimes notice, sometimes I said like, we slept well, meaning like me and the baby,
right.
It's like this, and which is true. A mother and a child is kind of like, they are one, but oftentimes they're not able to separate. And that creates like basis for codependency, right?
Right. Yeah, and then with the partners, I don't think that the people don't usually have the skills to take that ownership stance. And I think that a lot of people are afraid of that ownership because there's this, I guess there's this fear that somehow if I own my own feelings and I have proper boundaries, then I'm going to create separation, and then there's not going to be intimacy. And that's kind of the myth, I think. And I think that's what makes people not want to experiment with that stuff. But I think if you think about it differently, you can make a lot more sense, meaning that it can create more intimacy. Because, like, to answer your question about this couple, for instance, if the both people are sort of like, if you suggest that, like if I suggest that to the partners and I invite both of them to be on that same page, kind of even theoretically, then both people can actually motivate. Like, for instance, if I'm your partner and if you're kind of feeling in a funk, I can actually, instead of playing into your codependency and kind of supporting you in needing me, instead I can actually say, well, I trust you enough that you're going to use this as an opportunity to deepen into your own self and get to know yourself. So I can trust that you're strong enough, and I can trust that you can overcome it, not from a place of separateness, but from a place of trust and love. And so if both people can actually buy into this idea, they can still bond with each other.
Yeah, you can. No, I agree that that's not like you can have both. You can bond like in a different way, in a deeper way, not in a way that I need you for me. Because when you need the other person and they become like a mother figure or parent figure, you don't really see them. They just nurture, you know. You don't really see a person behind the projection. So basically, I think, of course, you bond more deeply. It's like a more mature bond if it's outside of that meeting.
Right.
Yeah, it's just sometimes I think it's hard for people to get on the same page because it is a hard work in a place of this need. And if you're used to having somebody there and now it's not, it's hard. It does require like a therapy process or a support process.
Definitely.
Where the therapist does not plan in codependency either, because therapists can do that too, right? That's kind of like I think it's shadow side of therapy when the therapist enables that dependency. Do you think so? I was kind of thinking about, there was a discussion in therapy group about like whether or not it happens. I don't know. I think it can really happen.
I think it definitely happens, especially if you're not introduced to the idea of ownership and kind of it's basically it's this idea that I cannot feel anything. My partner cannot make me feel anything that I am not already inside feeling. So if you come at it from that perspective, like if I feel abandoned or I feel hurt or demeaned by you, that must mean that there was some hook I was snagged that had already been there already. So if you look at it from that perspective, it's like, well, let's use this relationship as a way to expand consciousness and learn about our own stuff. And instead of like trying to preserve some white picket fence relationship just for the relationship. And that's a kind of a meager and shallow goal to shoot for with regards to, you know, what you can gain out of a relationship, because I think there's much learning to be done from a relationship. So I think maybe the codependency maybe comes from sort of a meager outlook on what relationships have to offer in the first place.
Yeah, like more like a narrow, right?
Right.
Outlook what you can get. Yeah, that's very interesting. That's more like yeah, like I think of it as like a child perspective. Like a child doesn't really feel all the possibilities of a adult mature relationship. A child just needs a parent, a mom, you know.
Right, because you'd want to naturally get curious. Like if you're being triggered by your partner and you're finding yourself angry, or you're finding yourself scared, or you're finding yourself lonely, or you're finding yourself unlovable, naturally, like I invite my clients is to get curious as to like, oh, I wonder how and why I'm having this reaction, not to just try to make sure that reaction goes away, or
Mm-hmm.
how can I make my partner different, or how can I solicit my therapist to make my partner different so that
Mm-hmm.
I don't have that feeling anymore. And like, okay, you could probably do that, and there's ways you can kind of manipulate the situation to make sure that that feeling doesn't show up, but it probably will anyways. So I say if you really want to understand yourself and have knowledge of self, that's where you'd want to go deep into that inner self belonging to see what is really down there. And maybe there is a homeless, abandoned person that's just like laying there, and that you have to come and
Probably a child.
yeah, and save, you know.
Probably, most likely. So a lot of times, a lot of people like come in, right, and they like, well, my partner is a problem, and they blame, right? And so the first step in therapy is to turn them around, right, and start taking ownership for what they feeling and responsibility that they actually in this relationship. Nobody's like holding them down, right? In that relationship, they're choosing this relationship for whatever reason, and so if they want to change, they need to start doing their own work, and then that's where the real work begins, right?
Right.
Their own process. Uh, and hopefully with that, when both people do work and they both evolved in the self-belonging, right?
Right.
And I like what you said that it's not preventing you from connection, because what I was on the other side, there's like codependency and there's counter
Right.
dependency, and I was always counter dependent, which is like I avoided needing someone ever. I was always like, this is like very self reliant. I don't need anyone, but also not allowing intimacy, and that's the difference. So that's the change for me. So like, and what I hear you saying, self-belonging, you are still reaching out for intimacy, but not from a like very needy place, but more like, I'm okay as I am, and I'm in pain, and it would be nice to be held right now. Could you do that for me? And if a person says yes, that's great. And if they say no, you're okay with that. You're okay with a no. That's the difference, I think, right? You're not falling apart.
Right.
So
Yeah.
because in the other instance, they
Nailed
just, yeah, thank you.
it.
In the other instance, the person's like, please don't leave me. I'm gonna die if you leave, right? Or like it just feels really bad alone. And the other person starts feeling guilty. And so the cycle starts, right? That's like the the entanglement emotional. And then this one feels very like clean. It's like, I'm in pain and I would like some help. Can you do this? No. And that you okay with that? It's very hard to play to like, it's a very hard place to be in, to be okay with the no, right? Have you experienced that? I mean, that's really hard, I feel.
You okay with what?
With the no, like if you're in pain, if
Oh yeah.
you
Yeah. 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 I mean, I love what you're saying. Everything. Like the first part you're saying, I think there is a certain level of discernment. It's sort of a subtle, and it's a middle place between the two. Like, yes, you don't want to seek connection from a place of desperation. It's not the you're not in proper footing. You're not on
mhm,
proper ground. You're kind of a wreck, and you're looking for somebody to save you. And that's not a good
mhm,
place. That's not a good leg to like. It's not a good tone. You know what I mean? To like start
mhm.
off a relationship or continue a relationship for that matter. Um,
Call your
so
therapist when you feel, call your therapist when you're feeling like that,
right.
or learn how to be supportive to yourself as well, right?
Yeah, and it's also important to discern maybe a certain sense of pride or something like, oh, I'm going to do this all on my own, um,
Right.
and that's also can be sort of a facade too, because it's like it's not about independence; it's about mutual interdependence. Um, but that means you still have to own your own part, so then you can mutually interdepend. So it is kind of a subtle thing to find. But as far as like the second part you said, I think that it does take a certain level of like emotional maturity to ripen into this, but I think it is possible. I've experienced it myself where I was able to use the rejection of my being rejected by my partner as a doorway to crack open into this my own tenderness that was already there, but I just started to feel it even more, and then it was able to meditate and connect to that homelessness or this sense of abandonment or that I had already there. So in some sense, I had this one time where my wife kind of was not available for me emotionally. And then I went and cried and meditated. And I had this amazing experience where like I connected with some like pain and then came out of it feeling really kind of full and tender and connected. And I then like even thanked her. I said, thank you for triggering this experience because I ended up being quite fruitful. I mean, and I know this is like, this takes some time, you know, to be able to do this, but I think it's okay to say this because I think that it's a potential that you can use situations that are seemingly, you know, difficult and being equanimous, meaning not judging the experience and seeing if you can just study yourself as a result instead of labeling it as, oh no, they did this to me and blame, but see if you can use it as an opportunity, you know?
Yeah, it's very hard to do. It's like, but possible, but possible.
It is possible.
I remember when I experienced the rejection, my immediate reaction is like, fine, you know, like, fine, I'm gonna go and be on my own. But it's like it wasn't fine. It was still like this sense of like, you know, I was offended. So I think to come to a very clean place with really like allowing rejection to happen, that's or maybe it's not even possible. Maybe we're always gonna have a reaction to rejection. Maybe it's natural. I think it is. I don't know. Like I certainly not in the place where I'm like rejected and I'm like I'm fine. I'm not. But and that's where self-belonging comes in is when I think like when you when you can stay with that reaction yourself, right? When you find something in yourself to support you through this, through falling apart as you're rejected, so you're not rejecting yourself, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that that's where it's important to look at like parts work, like IFS or, you know, sort of like therapists talk, but even to layman's term, like parts work is about like seeing that, oh yeah, there's a part of me that feels a bit pissed off and rejected, but see if I can at least have room or develop parts of myself that maybe a more observer part or a part that can understand, that I can think, oh, maybe my husband or maybe my wife, I know they have a good reason. They're probably taking care of themselves right now, or I trust that they're not available and they're honoring their no right now. They're needing space. So even if there's a little tiny part that can start to be developed, okay, if there's another part that's like, oh fuck this, and I mean, I'm, you know, bitter, but
It's usually
at least if you can hold those parts and see if you can be with them and not be so overly identified with the bitter part and just be completely bought into this idea that somehow you were wrong and you were a victim of what should have been.
right.
That is where you want to start.
Yeah, I love that. I use parts work a lot. That's what I also trained with Dan, the Process Therapy Institute. That's what he showed too, and internally family systems. But it's basically where I'm having trouble if I'm over identified with one part. It is like rejected. Usually it's a child part, and the child's feelings, which is like exiles, right, in IFS. So the child feelings are often so overwhelming, so I get consumed in the experience, you know. And the therapy work that I'm doing in my therapy is growing those other parts, you know, growing the nurturing parent part that can come in and support the child in the process, growing the adult part that's more saying, okay, you know, he's just taking care of himself, he's not feeling well himself, it's going to be okay. That's that's a great like therapy goals, right? Like a lot of people don't know what like we do in therapy, and that's like could be one example how you change, right? How you grow those parts where they support you, basically.
Right. Expand your awareness, your consciousness about the different realms that are present. And it's not just the one that you react to. It's not the only realm or perspective. And I think that going back to Don Hadlock in the Process Therapy Institute, he talked about allowance. I think that's essential to even allowing that bitter part. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that
Mm-hmm.
but when you allow it, you're obviously not that part because you're allowing that part from another part. You know what I mean? So a greater part. And allowance, I think, is sometimes can be synonymous with love, because if you think about it, like if it is an inner child that's hurt, when you have a child, like with my children, for instance, if my child is upset and I'm like, and I say, oh, it's okay, come here, I'm gonna let me hug you, like that's an allowance, and I'm loving. But if I push them away, that's like,
Mm-hmm.
resisting them. So that's not love. And so in a lot of ways, it kind of ties back to self-belonging and treating our own wounded parts is by saying, even to that bitter part, oh, I know you're bitter. I know you feel, rejected
Mm-hmm.
right now, but I'm gonna love you anyways. I'm gonna
Right.
include you. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's beautiful when it's available, right? Like when there's something that is capable of step back, not identify, right? Become this like bigger self and have another part available. And that's what I think is so important and so valuable in therapy work, because we learn how to do that. Because most of us is it's a feeling. Oh my god, I'm feeling it, and that's it. Kind of, that's where it ends. Just overwhelmed with the feeling, and so it's a lot of like awareness building, expanding your consciousness, like you said. That's what basically therapy is about. Do you agree?
Mhm.
Yeah, that's why we love it. It's great. It's,
Yeah, and for people who are watching, like I always love that Ram Dass mantra. He says, "I am loving awareness,"
mm-hmm.
and you could just if you have anything uncomfortable that's you going on throughout the day, even if it's not a big trigger or you're not like devastated by something, but even if it's just something funky or some sadness, and all you can just do is you put your hand there and just like, I am loving awareness, meaning lovingly attend to whatever is unfolding within you, and
Mm-hmm.
apply that loving awareness, and
Yeah.
and that's kind of where that's a good place to start.
Yeah, I agree. And I've learned this term lately. I don't know if you've heard it. It comes from transactional analysis anyway, another theory. It's called stroking, like psychological stroking and physical stroking. And you can start doing a lot of like self stroking, meaning what you said, that was like a stroke. I'm loving awareness. It's like coming back to myself. But you can say, like, if you do something for yourself, like you went for a walk, right? And you can say, wow, I went for a walk, I'm taking care of myself. Like, you can say good job, but it's more like, more evaluation. But it's more just noticing and maybe gratitude, like, oh, I'm really taking care of myself. But actually saying it to yourself, like giving that attention to yourself.
Mhm.
So, like, I know I don't do it enough. We just kind of like, and we end up like hungry for this, like, nurturance, and we crave it from others.
Yeah, and what I would like to add also is that to be careful, because it's kind of a textured experience, but with regards to this sort of attending to discomfort, um, what I invite people to do is to remember that when you do that, it's not to negate that discomfort
Mm-hmm.
or to try to get rid of it or to try to create a different, like more optimistic story, but to salve that discomfort. So it's almost like shining loving awareness onto it, meaning that you're not trying to, again, you're not trying to reject it. You're not
Mm-hmm.
trying to say that's not okay. There's no room in here for for this.
Please change. Please be happy.
Right. So so like when someone, just a reminder when doing those self-care strokes and things like that is not from an escapist perspective, but more as a way to attend and include and to be intimate with whatever is coming up.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure. And if you're able to do it, like kind of like thanking you, like, wow, I'm really like, I can really do this for me right now. It's, it's, I've learned so much. It's good self-care or something like that. Like appreciate your effort. That's what I mean. A lot of times we don't appreciate our efforts and we end up feeling like nothing is working. Like when clients make progress in therapy, sometimes they're not even noticing it. And then they can say, oh, I don't know if it's working. But you can say, well, look, you like last week, you were able to be warm with yourself. And that's a huge change, and kind of celebrate that success.
I think you talked about that. I noticed in one of your other maybe podcasts, or you talked about like this sort of maybe go, like I'm going to work on myself and keep working on myself. And I guess it kind of goes in line with that. So to maybe stop and acknowledge and not to be in a perpetual, like I got to improve myself type of program or something or agenda.
Yeah. Right. Because I do that a lot too, where it's like always the next goal, always the next like thing to improve, to work through. But it's not enough celebration of what has already happened. Not enough celebrations. Like celebrating what that's been huge shift. Like actually noticing what's good and what's working, what has been working.
Right.
Yeah, so I'm not on Facebook, so I don't know if we have any questions. I can take a look if we have any questions. And why don't you tell how people can find you if they're interested in your work or in the training programs?
Sure. Okay, so you can find me on spiralprocess.com, just one word, Spiral Process. My office is in downtown San Jose near the Whole Foods. And as far as I'm also one of the clinical directors at the Process Therapy Institute. We're also in downtown San Jose on the Alameda, and that website is processes.org. We actually are a counseling center, so if you're a couple or you're an individual that would like to, and we do low fee. So if you want to see one of our interns that I supervise, you might have me. You can have me behind a one-way mirror or behind a one-way Zoom to support my intern while they're doing therapy on you. It's kind of in line with what we just talked about, the sort of experiential, mindful, somatic kind of style therapy. And also, if you're a therapist and you want to be trained in this way, you can also come to us at processes.org. That's pretty much it. I have a Facebook, I have an Instagram, so Spiral Process Therapy.
I'll post the links to this chat. And I done this program, a year-long program when Don was alive, and I love this. I use it a lot in my work. Where just recommend it and definitely reach out. We actually have a question of Dmitry, so let's answer this question and then we end. How about that? Hey Dan, we have Verana commented and she's probably watching. Hi Verana. And she said, I feel so curious about that piece of supporting our partners by trusting them through their challenges. So let's talk maybe a little more about that, like how can we do it? And the way I understand it, it's like we see their strength, we see their power, even if they are like suffering, behind that, we see that they're whole. And we sort of, with our attention, we don't like support the suffering and the pain. We look towards the wholeness with our attention, sort of with our energy, right? Is that what you understand also?
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of it's a shift from, you don't want to like pity or have sympathy onto them, and you want to be. And Don would always say, from PTI, he would always say, don't be responsible, but be responsive. And that's sort of the shift. It's like you want to be attentive, but also not overextending or Because when you overextend, it's almost like you inadvertently, in order to kind of behaviorally almost confirm that they're not capable. Because if I have to help you more than I need to, that means you can't do it on your own. And so basically, I'm actually validating even more so that you can't do it on your own. So it's about kind of, and sometimes you have to sort of weather the storm of that feeling of like, oh God, like they're having such a hard time, but stay in your own heart. And you can also love behind the scenes too. You can send them love without anybody knowing. You can just energetically send them your best, highest regard, your deepest regard, and just believe in them, like Iryna.
Yeah, believe in them. And I know what happens for me a lot of times is that when my partner is suffering or in pain, that pain in him resonates with pain in me. And I'm starting to have this like dark mood and something is stirred up with me. But I think it's his, you know? And so I try to, and I'm like, oh, I don't like it. I want it to go away. So I'm gonna change his mood by sort of like comforting or like saying, oh, sweetie, change. I don't like this, change. So to help myself.
But you're comforting yourself, really, right?
Yes, but I'm comforting, but I'm really selfishly taking care of myself.
By proxy.
You know? Yeah. Basically, well, selfish. So yeah, so it was interesting to notice it, but like when I first step into like the house with a partner who's not well, it's very easy to blame him for what I feel too. It's like, oh, I feel your mood and I start feeling down and I don't like it. Please be happy so I can be happy. But if we attend to our own suffering in this moment, then we are becoming okay with their state. And then we can be present in a way that's supportive, not this like, please change.
And you touched on a really good point. It's like you have to also be okay with your own discomfort about them.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's like you said, you generate something out of thin air because you come home and your partner's in a funk, and then you're like, oh, what's wrong? What's wrong? What's wrong? And
yes. What's wrong? What's wrong?
Yourself generated, and then next thing you know, you're the one, you kind of steal it, you usurp it, and you're the one that is upset because you're trying. But learning to come home, express that you're available, say, hey, I'm here, I love you, and I'm here for you. And if they're in a funk and they just want to be in a funk, remain available, but also be okay with just going about your day and being with yourself.
Yeah, and respect their decision to stay in the funk if they want to stay in the funk. That's huge. Like respect that they're adult person that can decide. Yeah, their dignity, and sometimes if they want to stay in the funk, that's their choice, that's their right. And you can, that's, I think that's like we're talking about top level mastery, you know, because it's like it's super hard stuff, and it's very like energetically hard to do, but very possible. So Dmitry and I are here to give you hope that you can get there. It's just with awareness and support and work, you can do that. You can be very supportive and loving and owning your stuff.
And sometimes you will kind of teeter because you'll, as you experiment, you know, like you can go too far with kind of not caring, or be like, okay, fine, if it's their problem, I'm going to like, you know, take my time. And that can be sometimes maybe insensitive, and sometimes you can care too much. But eventually, if you experiment with it, you can come to a place where you can like, so you can kind of vibrate in a place where you're simultaneously attentive and available, but not taking it on. In
Yeah.
a tender and emotionally available place. And it takes time. But.
Love it. Yeah, love it. That's the goal. Well, Dmitry, thank you so much. It's been great to talk to you about this and share this process. We had some people watch, so we got some likes and Ron asked questions. So, and yeah, I'll share links with your information, and this will be video as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll have you soon at the Process Therapy Institute podcast, huh?
Please, yes. I love doing this. This is very alive and fun for me. So.
Okay.
All right. Bye, guys. Talk to you soon. Bye.